Hello guys, welcome back. Episode 3 of this tutorial where we are talking about props, hooks, and other important topics in React development. In this episode I have decided to talk about useEffect. This is also very important to understand. I mean, if you want to become like an effective React developer, I guess being aware of the capabilities of props, of states, and of hooks, they're very important. So in this episode, I'm going to show you what useEffect is and how you can take advantage of useEffect to handle side effects and data persistence inside of your components. So I'm going to talk about the concept behind side effects. What does it mean? Why are we calling this hook effect, useEffect, right? It is a little bit misleading. I'm going to explain that. And as before, we're going to update the application that we have developed so far with some new features. So let's get started and talk about useEffect. Let's talk about side effects and data persistence. So the objective of this episode is to understand what useEffect is and why it's used, to learn the concept of side effects in React applications, and to use useEffect to save and load your book list from local storage. So right now, if you remember from the previous episode, our application is capable of showing some initial books inside of the the books that are defined inside of the app component. So this is the app component with this state, right, with two initial books, and I have added two new books, right, for myself, as you can see here. But the problem right now is that whenever I refresh the page, I lose those two books that I added, so they're not persisted anywhere, right? This is what we're going to tackle in this episode. So in this episode, we're going to use useEffect to save our list of books to local storage and then to load them from our local storage as well. And that is exactly what a side effect means, right? A side effect is something that you need to do besides loading your component. So let's talk about useEffect first at a theoretical level. So in React, useEffect is a hook that lets you run side effects in function components. Side effects. So if loading your component is the main responsibility that you have or that your application has, side effects are the other things that you need to do. Alongside loading your component or attaching your component to the DOM, right? So this is what side effect actually means. So what is a side effect? Why are we using the word effect in the name of that hook, useEffect? So any operation that affects something outside the component, like the DOM, a timer, or communicating with local storage, is a side effect. So it needs to be outside the component. Local storage is not inside of the component. It is like an external entity that you communicate with to load some data, to save some data to, right? So it is a side effect. Or needs to run after rendering the component, like for example, fetching some data, subscriptions, and so on. So yeah, anything that you need to do, any sort of operation that you need to do in addition to attaching that component to the DOM is a side effect. And you're going to use the useEffect hook to do them. Now, this is the way to use the useEffect. So take a look at the code. You're going to use useEffect. You're going to pass in this function and your code, and then an array that we call the dependencies array. So the effect runs after the component renders. This is the important thing. So first your component renders, and then the effect, the code that you've got here renders. So it says code to run after render. The dependencies array controls when this code runs. So there are different values that you can set. For example, an empty array means that you need to run only once after the initial render of the component. So if you do not pass any objects to this array, your code inside of the useEffect hook is going to render only once. It's going to be called only once when the component first renders. And when the component re-renders, nothing is going to happen anymore. And then, if you pass in some state, for example, the code inside of your useEffect runs whenever that state changes. So for example, if you pass in, let's say, title, author, I don't know, like is red, this piece of code runs when that, state, the value inside of that state changes. This is why we're calling this the dependencies array. It's like running the code inside of this depends on the value you set or the objects you reference in that, array, dependencies array. Let's talk a little bit about the local storage as well. So local storage is like a browser API that stores key value pairs. So it's like a place where you can store some values as key value pairs, so some keys with corresponding values, and you can of course load them later. So it is like a place that your browser maintains, a storage place that your browser maintains, that you can kind of store some initial some let's say simple values, key value pairs. And data inside of your local storage persists between page reloads. So whenever you reload the page, you're not going to lose your data. Of course, you can clear out the data that you have inside of your local storage, but the data is going to remain there. And it is perfect for small applications to store things like our book list, for example. So right now, the book list, as I showed you, is going to lose the new books that we have added whenever the page is reloaded. But if we persist them with, the local storage API, if we persist them in our browser storage, as a kind of a key value per thing, we're not going to lose them anymore. And in order to load some data and in order to save some data, so it's a kind of a side effect operation, we're going to use the useEffect. So think about it. We want to do something. We want to load some data from local storage whenever the component is rendered. So we are going to carry out a side effect after the component has been attached to the DOM. So we're going to use the useEffect hook. So we're going to load books from local storage whenever the component first renders, and we're going to save the books to local storage every time the book list, which is the state, and a state inside of the component changes. First, we need to update our app.js. So we're going to, create this new version of the books state. We haven't set any initial value, any initial, let's say array for this books. Right now, if you take a look at my app.js, you see that for this state, I am setting this initial, array. But I have, removed that here. I have the 3 states as before. Now, as you can see, I have 2 separate useEffect hooks. The first one, take a look at it. The first one, it's gonna get the books, passing the key, right? It's gonna get the value of this key from the local storage, and it's gonna save it inside of this saved books, variable or constant in this case. And then it's gonna say, if saved books, if there are some values here, then use the set books state, and then parse the saved books that you got from the local storage and set the new values for the books. And the dependency array is empty. It means that this piece of code runs only once after the component first renders. So this is the way to load the books from local storage. And then whenever the value inside of the books array changes, we want to also save the books array to the local storage. So set item with the key and the value, the a stringified version of the books object or books array. The dependency here says books. Books is a state inside of my component. It means whenever the value of the books changes, run this piece of code. And we all know when the value changes, right? The value changes inside of the handle at book here. This is one place where the value inside of this state changes, and when the value changes, this piece of code is going to be executed, and the new data inside of the books state is going to be saved to the local storage under this key. And as before, we're going to do some, two-way data binding for the 3 inputs, and we're going to map through them, as you can see here, to show them one by one. Now what I want to do is to move on to my code to change the component, right? So that the component now uses not some hard-coded initial books, but some books coming from local storage. So let me import useState and useEffect from React. And then let's create the component. Let's create the estates, books, and set books. Notice that we're not setting some initial, array with some book objects to the books state. And then the 3 other states, title, author, is read. So useEffect, 2 useEffects, right? The first one is for saving the data to the local storage. For reading the data from the local storage only once when the component first loads. And then another useEffect to run every time the value inside of the estate changes the books state. If you want to revise states, I highly recommend checking out the previous episode. So now, as before, we're going to write the code for handle book, which is going to do some simple data validation to make sure there are some values inside the title and author. And then it's going to construct a new book object with the values inside of the estates for title, author, and is read. Remember, those values are set using the input fields in the form, and then it's going to mutate or change the books state and add that new book. And then it's going to reset title, author, and is read. Now, the template. The template as before, it's going to be very easy. So we're going to need a couple of, or 3, let's say, input fields that are bound to those 3 estates, title, author, is read. We're going to handle the form submission using the add book. This is the 2-way data binding, value and unchange. So when you use the value attribute and the unchange event, you're doing 2-way data binding. Binding your input to your state. Whenever the value inside of your state changes for whatever reason, that change is going to be reflected using the value attribute of your input. And whenever the unchange event triggers on your input, that state is going to get new value because you're setting that state inside of the code for the unchange event handler. Set title, set author, and set is read using e.target.value, using the value inside of the input in question. Now, the last input is going to be a checkbox. Now the button for submitting the form, and then let's map through the book's state. And for each book inside of that state, let's invoke the book card component and pass in the props key title, author, and is read. Now let's export the app component. I'm going to remove this, and this is the mark as read. input. Okay, now we're loading the books from the local storage, right? We do not have any books now. Now let me add the first book. So React development made awesome. The author is going to be me. Mark as read. Let's add the book. Now this, because I mean, whenever I click on this button, the books state is changed. And whenever the book state is changed, this piece of code is going to execute. And this piece of code, as you can see, is going to set this new books array to the local storage under this key. That means if I, refresh the book, I lost it. Let me see if I have some errors here. I lost that, book that I added. So let me add another book. So right now it has to be saved. I can take a look at the application tab. So local storage, I don't see it here. There should be, some error that I'm going to investigate and tell you about. So I resolved the issue and I'm going to share the fix with you. So after I investigated the issue, I realized that the root cause of this issue is because of using strict mode inside of my main.jsx. I turned that off and now I can get my books inside of local storage. And if I refresh, I don't lose these books. So it turns out the reason is that when I'm using React.strict mode, the useEffect that I'm using might sometimes run twice instead of once in development. So this could cause unexpected, behavior. So I disabled that, right? And now the application is working inside of dev environment. And of course, I am going to enable that again, for production. But right now, everything is working. So I am getting my books here. So that's a wrap for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. If that's the case, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one.